This is my first time at this conference, and I have to say it's really exciting, and even to hear a group of people talk about teaching with any kind of intention whatsoever is so wonderful. So that's been really uplifting. Okay, so here's my first slide, and when you look at it, it seems like kind of busy. There's all these acronyms all over the place. You know, what the heck am I going to talk about? I'll get to that in a little while, but of course you know the top middle acronym is the provides generous support for this whole affair, and I'll get to all the math societies around the edges in a few minutes. Working in Washington, we like acronyms even more than as a math community we do, and I don't know about this name for the project, Linda, because KVUMP doesn't really work, I don't think. I don't think that is very good. So whenever I talk to students about public speaking, I tell them they may not apologize at the beginning because you definitely don't want your audience feeling sorry for you. But I'm going to break that advice right now and apologize for two things. One, this will not be an IBL talk because, well, there were a number of reasons. Linda and I had this big fantasy and about all sorts of ways to get you guys to work together. We went out shopping yesterday and bought hundreds of index cards, and I guess you're going to have to bring them home in your suitcase or something, or donate them to the cause. So that's my first apology, that it won't be too IBL. There will be questions, but there won't be answers or things like that. Also, the second apology comes from the yesterday point of all this. So we met, the leadership group for this project met on Wednesday, all day Wednesday here and half of Thursday. And then I wrote this talk. Usually I'm very prepared for a talk. I know exactly what I'm going to talk about weeks in advance. We're just starting, as you'll hear, so that's my second apology. Okay, enough with the apologies, right? So just to tell you a bit where my background, I've been on the ground for 25 years teaching. I love teaching. I love thinking about course content, course development, program development, you know, minors, majors, all that stuff. I love developing courses in my department. I love developing courses, multidisciplinary courses. I really like thinking about education in the big picture, thinking about, not thinking about, but actually experimenting with pedagogies, all that stuff. I feel really lucky to have a job that really doesn't bore me. I mean, it's embarrassing to admit, but like every time I teach calculus, it's a new exciting experience. Maybe that's embarrassing, but don't, you know, whatever. Okay, so this project is a totally different thing where we're kind of going up to 30,000 feet and trying to get a good view of a huge landscape of undergraduate math education. And I'm going to start with a slide here and just ask, so this is one of the places where, you know, if I was really teaching, you'd all have cards and you could fill this in. But the first 2 years of college math should prepare students for. Okay, well, this slide is a terrible slide in my opinion. It really doesn't work out at all for me. It should probably look a lot more like that. I mean, that's a terrible slide too, but you probably get the point. There's a lot of things that the first 2 years of college math should do, and as you're sitting out there, I'm sure that you are thinking about things, right? Like what exactly are the first 2 years of college math doing for our students, or what should they be doing? What should they be doing for all students, you know, and all of us? And here's my really creative use of PowerPoint. Can you read these at all? Okay, so maybe you think, maybe your first answer is that the first 2 years of college should prepare students for going on in a math major. Great answer. Maybe for STEM majors, you know, maybe the first 2 years of college math are you work in an engineering school. Maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe non-STEM majors. And here what I'm thinking about is something like a geography student who's doing a GIS concentration of some sort, and they really need good quantitative skills. Maybe we should just be teaching, maybe the goal of the first 2 years is to teach students to read the Wall Street Journal or do good data analysis. I think we like to think that we have great agility of mind, and maybe the point is to get our students to be more agile in their thinking. Perhaps we want them to think logically and without bias. I think we all think that one thing that mathematicians, I think, do really well is approach problems without bias. And we think we can think through things in a quite logical fashion. Maybe the point is to prepare better citizens, enable our students to participate in democracy. I think that's one of the main points of education. Or perhaps a more noble idea that we'd like them to see the beauty and relevance of math. These are all terrific answers. And I think we'd probably all agree that we like all of them. You know, we want our students to become better people. We want them to really feel the beauty of math, whatever that means. And we definitely want them to gain some skills so that they can go out into the workplace and be positioned better, or into the workforce. And I should stop and say something about workforce. When I say workforce, I mean everybody. I mean, we're the workforce. Everybody wants a job. Everyone wants to work. Workforce is everybody who finishes college and gets a job. So whatever your answers are to these questions, or this question, there are certain questions that we need to answer. And now I'm going to sort of move on to the grant, or the project that we're working on, which we have a grant proposal in for, and try to articulate what we're doing. So I'm about to put up 5 more questions that I think of in groups of, well, the first 2 kind of go together, and then the second 2, and then the 5th one. And the first 2 are, how do we design courses, programs, and pedagogies to help our students achieve those goals? Those goals being whatever our answers were to the prior question. And how do we use technologies to help our students achieve these goals? So those are the first 2 questions that I'm not going to answer. And then I want to move on to the second 2. How do we support students in this endeavor? And we heard this over the last panel. How do we support faculty members in this endeavor? I mean, teaching, after all, is about, you know, the main thing is about our students, but obviously faculty need a lot of support to achieve this. So those would be the next 2 questions. And then the 5th question is, what works successfully at different types of schools? And anyways, what the heck do we mean by successful? I mean, we have to have a good sense of what we mean by successful. That's different. There's many answers to that question as well. But what works successfully? I want to highlight something in this sentence, or this question also, about different types of schools. It might not be totally clear what I mean by that. But you can contemplate that for a second. This is the active part, where you're sitting there thinking. Actually, the active part is maybe you're eating. Okay, so we definitely want to include, I've just listed 5 different types of schools. I mean, we're talking about community colleges, we're talking about liberal arts colleges, we're talking about research universities, we're talking about land-grant institutions, we're talking about minority-serving institutions. The entire landscape of higher ed is basically what we're talking about. This is a big project, taking everything on board here. So I'm an optimist, but I think we have to really acknowledge the serious challenges that our community faces. And so I'd like to list some problems that we have. We have a problem with, or we're charged with having a problem with recruitment, retention of STEM students. Oh, and I wanted to say something. You may know, but do you guys know that STEM was first called SMET? But that name was changed, I forget when, but that didn't work out, you know, so well for various reasons. But I think it's nice to know that. We also have a challenge with the recruitment, retention of women and minorities in STEM fields. We have a problem that we wish, or a lot of people wish, that we had a more mathematically literate population. So I guess the problem is that perhaps the general population is not mathematically literate. We have been charged with not connecting STEM fields and non-STEM fields, or math to other STEM fields, or whatever. Connecting silos is a challenge for us. I'm not, so a lot of people say they want to break down silos. I actually think there's some value in silos. I mean, we like our home. We want a home somewhere. But I'd rather us connect silos. The different types of schools might be considered silos. They serve different purposes. I mean, there's different people we need to serve. And we're different people. We need different homes. But we should connect more. And we heard about that when we were listening to the work going on at the University of Chicago and Michigan and so on. And last night, Mike Starbird told me about the UT system work that's going on. I mean, that's the kind of thing when I think of connecting silos, or one example. We also have the challenge that we are developing and adapting all these different technologies, and that's happening quickly, and it's a hard thing to do. And then the big one I sort of saved for last, which I think is big in the public domain. There's serious problems with graduation rates, and maybe even more so with timely completion of college. If you look at 4-year and 6-year college graduation rates now, I mean, they're terrible. And as we know, math plays an unfortunate role in being a stumbling block, or is a real problem in that context. So these problems have been identified by several groups, including the President's Advisory Council, or Council of Advisors, sorry, on Science and Technology, the PCAST group. Also, the National Research Council has published a report, Mathematical Sciences in 2025, and there were a pile of these out on the table if you didn't pick one up. I mean, it's great reading. I'm sure you'd agree. Lots of good reading in here. It really is interesting, actually. Okay, so these are hard problems, but we like hard problems. I think we all like hard problems. There's a lot of good solutions. There's many good practices. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. There's no best solution. There's a lot of good solutions. So that's kind of where we are. So back to being an optimist. The good news about undergraduate math education is that there are many initiatives, like the IBL Initiative, and I've been hearing a lot about some great, like, general education courses over the past day and a half. These are great initiatives, and there are many recommendations from various groups that exist. There's also increased attention in not only the math community, so from different types of schools, but also with policymakers and sort of the general public on undergraduate math education. So we feel, these are a few quotes from our grant proposal. We feel that it's an opportune time to view the landscape from a higher elevation, like 30,000 feet or something. Is that what height planes fly at? Does anybody know? Is that good? Okay, that was good. Got that right. By the way, as a sort of little commercial or break or something, I have no idea what these things on the floor are. There's like helicopter landing pads at the front of the room, if no one's noticed. Sort of interesting. Okay. So, it's an opportune time to view the landscape from a higher elevation in order to get a broad overview of the state of the undergraduate mathematics curriculum. And it's an opportune time to identify common themes and approaches to both content and delivery toward the goal of establishing a shared vision for modernized curricula and pedagogies to better prepare students for the demands of their future careers, no matter what those careers are. I think that we're also kind of fortunate that there's some widespread belief that a college education is more valuable now than it ever has been. Even in the context of all these conversations about cuts in state spending on higher ed and tuition rate rise and all that, there's still much more value, it's considered much more valuable now. The long-term forecast for people who have a bachelor's degree is substantially better than for people who have only some college or only a high school degree. And people are paying attention to that. Also, there's a widespread belief, so these are big, like really big picture things, that education is really one of the best ways to attack the problem of poverty in the country. And then there's also some widespread belief that math and science workforce is facing a serious supply issue. So I think we're well positioned to move forward with all this stuff. So let me return to the 5 associations. So now sort of onto what we're doing. So you might be familiar with some of these or all of these, but let me just run through it. I mean, you probably know these, but the one with the nice function graph of a function, what function? Anyways, that's the, what is it? Yeah. Okay, that's the association for 2-year colleges. And then there's the American Statistical Association, the American Maths Association, the Math Association of America. I'm not saying their entire names. And then the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. And why these particular groups? And why not other groups? There's lots of societies. In fact, the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences consists of 16 professional societies, all of which have as one of their primary objectives the increase or diffusion of knowledge in one or more of the mathematical sciences. That's a very broad statement. But of those 16, these are the 5 who have as part of their mission a focus on undergraduate teaching. So that's why these 5. So for the rest of the time, I want to tell you what our plan is, where we're going, what the heck's going on. So our plan, and sorry, these are a bit wordy. It does feel odd lecturing at such a thing, but that's what I'm doing, it would appear. So we want to develop a shared vision of the need to modernize the undergraduate mathematics curriculum. As I said, especially the first 2 years, we're really focusing on that. And this is a vision that a group of professional societies, namely those 5, will be able to endorse and promulgate. And we have some confidence that a broad section of the community will embrace. And in doing all this, we want to be more intentional in the way that we need to be more intentional in the way that we present our common vision to the public. The public, who do I mean by the public? I mean policymakers, I mean college administrators, I mean newspaper readers, all those people. And we really need to provide the direction for our own research in education and math, really. So we need to make these arguments well. So the first thing that we did, the group of us, so there's 6 of us, and we spent, I think I already said this, but we spent all day Wednesday and yesterday morning talking about these curricular guidelines, which you can see up there, and trying to think about what we see as commonalities and differences in the different guidelines put out by the various societies. So the first one, the AMATIC, let me see if I've grabbed the right one. There are things like this. So the first one, this is called Beyond Crossroads, and it's a curricular guide put out by AMATIC. Okay, so we have things like this. I've got the, this is the bottom one, the Siam one, looks like this. Okay, we've got all these guidelines, and since I'm representing the MAA, I should point you to the 2 MAA ones. Or maybe I'm representing all of these right now. But the Committee on Undergraduate Program in Mathematics has a big guideline or a big guide that's online. It's really interesting. You can take a look at it. The CRAFTY recommendations, so CRAFTY stands for the curricular renewal across the first 2 years. And where's Sue? Okay, Sue Doré over there is the chair of that committee, so you can talk to her about that. But we're looking at all these things. Our goal is we are not aiming to define give our own definition or our own thoughts about what should be the curriculum, but more to pull all these together and see if there's any common direction that people are going. There's a few other things that we're looking at. These are just a few other things that we're looking at. So the first group, the Dana Center, you might be familiar with the Statway and Quantway and New Mathways projects. That's where they come out of. The Ingenious project is a joint project between the MAA and the Statistical Association specifically to address workforce development challenges. And the National Research Council thing is what I showed you earlier. So in our talking, and I'm kind of trying to articulate what we went through over the past few days. Oh, and I should say that just to remind ourselves, we're talking about content and delivery. They go together. So we began with the recommendations, like I said, from the professional societies, and we identified common themes. And we decided that the set of recommendations we were looking at prioritized improving our practices, scaling innovations, and enhancing our public face. So what do I mean by each of these? What do I mean by improving our practice? That's where things like designing courses go, and thinking about how to teach our students, and making connections between course content and career choices and pathways through a major. I mean, a major should be much more than just a collection of courses. I know you all agree. And how is this done? This is done through program review, a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-monitoring. And it's really important to close the loop. You try something, you get feedback, and then you have to do something with that feedback. You can't just sit there with the feedback. You have to do something and improve and continue. So that's what I mean by improving our practices. Then the question of scaling these innovations. Scaling, this is a real challenge. I mean, we've probably all been part of something where you can do something on your own, sitting there at your own school, but then what happens? I mean, either you want to make it larger and have your whole department do something, or even everybody teaching college algebra or whatever, you know, the larger scale thing is. You might want to try to transfer an idea from one school to another. You also might have to deal with sustaining this. I mean, what happens if you develop a course and then you go on sabbatical, or you leave your school, or whatever? Schools need to think about this. And then the enhancing the public face has to do with our connecting with policymakers, the administrators, newspapers and magazines, also industry and business. So this is kind of where we left off yesterday at lunchtime. And I'm just going to finish up by showing you where we think we're going. So we also set an agenda for what we want to be the outcome, which will be in about a year, something like that. So we're going to have an executive summary of the society guides. And we don't just want to produce something written that people either read or don't read, but then these things are great, but then what happens? So we'd like to write some kind of joint statement that's a narrative, a short narrative, about what we see as the common themes that have arisen in all these, from all these societies, and try to tie, and then we're going to have people from each of the societies try to tie it to the needs of their own societies. So there will be something that will be produced for the AMS notices, for, we hope, this is the plan, that will say what the implications of this our joint statement is for the AMS, and how it ties to the SIAM, and so on. We're also going to work on our public relations and marketing. So one example is that we might come up with a template letter that you could bring to your congressional representative if you want to do something in the state system or something like that. We're also, this is only phase 1 of the whole project, and phase 2 is where a lot of the good work will happen, we hope. And we hope to set a framework sort of guide for writing phase 2 grants. And this is what I mean by we need to be the ones saying where we want our research to go. And then we also want to have an annotated list of successful initiatives. So how are we going to get to these places? How are we going to get there? Well, we're going to work hard. We're going to have workshops. We're also going to run focus groups at various meetings coming up. And so there's a couple things that we'd really like you to do. And this is where we had this grand plan about like having you do it right now with index cards, but then it just did not seem like a good idea. So we'd like you to email us any examples of successful initiatives. Okay, and we're serious about this. So in a minute, I'll put up my email and Linda's email. Email us examples of things that are going on, programs. And this can be anything, a standalone course. It can be a new minor in your department that you think is really terrific, you know, really anything. Also, we will be running focus groups. The first one will be at MathFest, then there'll be one at the AMATIC Fall Meeting, which is that October or November, it's somewhere in there, and then also at the Joint Math Meeting. And so email us and let us know if you want to be a part of a focus group. We'll be reaching out to people, but also please do let us know. And finally, I'm going to tell you who the us is in all this. So there's me. And then there's Linda, my partner in crime over there, who introduced me. And then there's Rob Farinelli, who's a past president of AMATIC. And then Vilma Mesa, who's sitting over there. Why don't you stand up? And she's at the University of Michigan. And then there's Uri Treisman, who is, a lot of people had to go to Texas this morning. But he went to Texas, as did Peter Turner. So everybody went to Texas. He's the executive director of the Dana Center, and if you aren't familiar with his work, I mean, you really should be. And then Peter Turner, who's the vice president for education of SIAM. And then finally, I will put up the contact information for Linda and I, and I'll answer any questions. I'll check the time. I think that's good. I'll answer any questions. There are microphones. Yeah, I see them. And if you have questions and you get up, state your name and your affiliation. And I think that's it. So thank you very much. And
hello, I'm Stephen Greenstein, Montclair State University. When I saw your first slide about first and second year should prepare students for what, I said third and fourth year. It's because I was feeling a little jaded about education as preparation for. And I wonder whether it's worth thinking about education as serving other purposes beyond preparing us for what comes next, right? There's the joke that there's calculus and everything else is pre-calculus. I think about education in a math class as an opportunity to participate in a community of learners around a practice that we all care about, an opportunity for students to make sense of the world, these things they can use tools now. And I worry that when we think about education for preparation, it constrains the possibilities for what we do in our classroom if we're always thinking about our goal is this standard that wise people have agreed upon, but Joan has not agreed on, my student. I don't know if it's idealistic or not, but I think it's worth asking the question or pushing back against the assumption that the work is about, that education is about preparation.
Okay, that's really an interesting remark. So the whole, Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. You mean that it would be more about the experience itself? Well, there is, yeah, of course. I would not argue with that. It is for the experience itself. But I also think that it's preparing you for things. But I'm talking about big picture things, so the kind of things you're talking about, like being able to engage in conversations of a certain type, or being able to participate in those learning communities after the class is over, right? But good point.
Hi, Karen.
Hi.
I'm Carl, and you know that. So I have a question about the first 2 years of college math. How many students at our colleges are taking even one course in mathematics? And so what do we have to say about that? And I don't have any agenda, but I feel like the fact that it even says the first 2 years of college math, the vast majority of the students in college at any level will not be taking more than one semester. And that depends on whether you count a statistics course that teaches them how to use, a couple of basic tests as a math course.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if that's going to be addressed by your working group or not, but that's really a big thing.
Yeah, so I think I mean, and Linda, you should say something, but my view is that we're looking at the set of courses that have been traditionally taught that a student in the first 2 years of college would take. And these are college credit-bearing courses. Now, whether they take one, like a data analysis course that has very little prerequisites, and they learn the one you can't really read, the white one, or the one I can't really read, says reading the Wall Street Journal. Maybe that's all they do. Or maybe they are going on to math and take 8 courses, it's sort of a maximum. Maybe they take 8 courses during that time. But maybe they only take one. In fact, I know that, you're absolutely right, that most people only take one course. So my own view about that is you better make darn sure that every course is a good terminal course. And that kind of speaks to your point too. I mean, you don't want any course to be only for even like Calc 1, you don't want the only thing to be, but then you can take Calc 2. I mean, Calc 1 has to have its serious own value. But I don't know if that answers your question, but we know, and we're looking at, not that a student would take 2 years of math, but the courses that would typically be taken by a student in their first 2 years. And probably that is one course. Yeah.
Hi, Karen. This is Joyati Devnath. I'm from Winona State University. I absolutely enjoyed your talk, and especially to keep a common interest through a variety of organizations and looking forward for 2025. My question is how by 2025 we can keep more students in class and not working 40 hours a week besides taking full load of classes. I hear this over again and over again, that why they were not able to do the homework, or why they were not able to make the study session or the group work, because they have to work 40 hours. And then there are people that they are their bosses at the workplace, and they get very, very threatened that if they don't show up, or if somebody drops, or if somebody's sick and they get called. And so is there anything that, as all the societies together, trying to think about something to do towards 2025 to keep more of our students in class?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, that's an even bigger problem than what we're proposing to talk about. I mean, that's really the huge problem that higher education is facing altogether, I would say. And now you're kind of leading me into the other half of my life right now, or basically my whole life right now. And that's something that's not restricted to math classes, of course. We need some kind of huge legislative change and state change about the whole model of higher education to address that. So I'm afraid I'm going to pass on. I mean, I've got ideas. We can talk later, but I would say that's not part of this project. This project is kind of premised on the fact that a student is taking a class, whatever taking means, and taking can mean a lot of different things. But I agree that that's a huge problem. And maybe as we think forward, we do have to think about how to accommodate them in terms of the delivery models for classes, but that's not a math class problem. Sorry. It's a huge problem. That's our big challenge.
Hi, Karen. I'm Jeffrey Pear. I had a question about something you mentioned about the STEM drought.
About what, sorry?
You had mentioned that we have a lack of STEM graduates, S-T-E-M, STEM. There's this alternate idea floating around the communities that we don't really have a drought, but perhaps the corporations need more STEM graduates to have a surplus so that we can have lower wages for our workers. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think you're right that there are two sides, that some people say we don't have a shortage. And I think one thing it depends on is how you define a STEM worker. I mean, who counts as a person working in a STEM field, right? I mean, I think we'd all agree that certain people count, but are you counting the X-ray lab technician as a STEM, someone who's working in a STEM field? And so when I've heard these arguments, like in the Senate, the people are talking about, really it comes down to how they define who works in STEM fields.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
V.A. Samaranayaka from Missouri University of Science and Technology, which happens to be a STEM school. But maybe we are asking the wrong question here. We just had lunch, right? And we had a choice of food to eat. So maybe it doesn't matter what we learn, but there are some basic food items we have to survive. So the question is, what's the mathematics you really need to survive in society? And I think that's a fundamental question. And you can add on to that. You can put some salad dressing on top of that. But what's the basic food you want to have? So.
Well, I might shoot back and say, I mean, wouldn't that be different for different people? Okay, come back.
I did not hear your question.
What?
I did not hear your question.
Oh, wouldn't that be different for different people?
Yeah, it'll be different for different people, but if we don't get a certain amount of nourishment, like carbohydrates and some vitamins, we are going to die, or we are going to get sick. And I think there are people in society, my opinion, that doesn't have that basic mathematics. And so they are not going to be good citizens, they are going to have problems, and so we need to really look deep and see what are those fundamental elements we need.
Right. TJ is going to make up an announcement. Thanks again for listening. And